Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Bailov channel, and this is the daily summary of combat operations from the Ukrainian front line. Well, what do we have now? A mutiny on President Volodymyr Zelensky's ship, and some rats are already fleeing that ship, right? Minister Rustem Umerov, they say, has run away. There is a lot of conflicting information. Some say he went to Turkey and then told President Volodymyr Zelensky that he is not coming back. Ukrainian officials insist, no, we simply extended his business trip. And other sources claim that he is in the United States, giving testimony to the Federal Bureau of Investigation against President Volodymyr Zelensky and Andriy Yermak. By the way, some members of parliament, even from President Volodymyr Zelensky's own party, are demanding that Andriy Yermak be fired. In short, the situation is shaking. The chair under President Volodymyr Zelensky is wobbling, and it seems this is happening thanks to the team of President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, on the front line things are very bad. And now let us break down what is happening at the front. So friends, the past 24 hours were extremely intense. There were many advances and important ones. In one day, 3 settlements were taken and nearly 50 square kilometers of territory. But while everyone is focused on Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, are you aware that the armed forces of Ukraine may lose Siversk in the shortest time? Yes, it sounds unbelievable, but yesterday Russian soldiers managed to break into the city. And they advanced well. We will analyze everything in detail, but yesterday the fighters released footage showing a Max Pro vehicle completely packed with Ukrainian troops. Russian drone operators spotted it and flew a drone directly inside. As a result, 8 Ukrainian servicemen were killed. You can watch the footage on my Telegram channel. The video was provided by the soldiers. This is extremely fresh material. Just the day before yesterday, they burned a Max Pro together with the Ukrainian troops inside. The link to my Telegram channel is in the description and in the pinned comment. Now let us move on to Siversk. Here, please take a look at the configuration of the front line. The soldiers managed to enter Siversk from the south. The advance inside the city reached more than 1.5 kilometers through dense residential areas. This is not just an entry into the outskirts, grabbing a couple of houses and reporting, "We are in the city." No, this is serious. The troops advanced deep into the city along Shkolnaya Street, Pavlov Street, Dmitry Mendeleev Street, and Pushkin Street. In the eastern part of the city, and as you can see on the map, the city is split into western and eastern sections by a railway line. Russian troops cleared garden plots and reached Yuzhnaya Street. And in the western part, they reached Rodionovsky Patrioty Street. Thus, fix this date somewhere. On the 17th of November of the year 2025, the battles for Siversk began. Battle number 2, because, as many remember, Russian troops already attempted to take the city in July of the year 2022. But that attempt was unsuccessful. Now the situation is completely different. Personally, I have no doubt about the success, and here is why. In addition to entering Siversk from the south, there was another, and I would say even more important, advance in the north. Look here, the troops moved 3 kilometers from the village of Dronivka and entered Platonivka. They entered and pushed the armed forces of Ukraine out. The village is now fully under Russian control. And the importance is not only in the village itself, but in the fact that this village is less than 1 kilometer from an extremely important road, the Sloviansk-Lyman-Siversk highway. This was the main supply route of the Ukrainian garrison in Siversk. Now the logistics are collapsing. And although Russian soldiers have not yet physically cut the road, I think you understand perfectly. When an army stands 800 meters from a road, no one will risk using it. So what do we get? The armed forces of Ukraine now have only one supply route to Siversk, through the village of Sviatopokrovsk. But even this road is under Russian drone observation at distances between 2 and 3 kilometers. This is a death road. When first-person view drones are everywhere and the sky is full of them, a 2 to 3 kilometer corridor means at least 80% of all transport will be destroyed. Thus, we can confidently say that Siversk is in operational encirclement. Both supply roads are under Russian drone control. One of them will be physically cut very soon. You can clearly see the cauldron forming on the map. However, and this must be noted, the armed forces of Ukraine still have a chance to withdraw from the city. the bottleneck is still 9.5 kilometers wide, which is not small. Yes, the roads are under drone control, but they can withdraw not only via roads, but through fields. Still, I am confident they will wait until the last moment. And then the same scenario will happen as we now see in Mirnohrad. When the escape corridor shrinks to 1 kilometer, withdrawal becomes impossible, and they will simply end up locked inside Siversk. As for the timing of when Siversk will fall, I will not make precise predictions. But I can definitely say this: it will not happen this year. Or to put it more precisely, it is unlikely to happen this year. There is still a lot of work ahead. But March or April of the year 2026 seems like a realistic time window. We move on. A major collapse for the armed forces of Ukraine occurred in the Kharkiv region, not in Kupiansk. There, on the contrary, the armed forces of Ukraine are constantly throwing troops into counterattacks to try to retake parts of the city. For the past 2 weeks, every single day, they have launched assaults. They achieved something. For example, the village of Moskovka, although marked red, is actually a grey zone. Sobolevka is under the armed forces of Ukraine. Sadovaya is also a grey zone, but inside Kupiansk itself, Russian troops hold their positions firmly. So the question is, where do the armed forces of Ukraine get the manpower for these counterattacks? I will tell you, they took these forces from the north, and after pulling them away, collapses began further north. Russian troops captured the village of Vovchansk and nearly cleared the pocket between Bologivka and Kamyanka. To give you a sense of scale, the area captured here exceeds 26 square kilometers. A very significant result. Also, near the town of Vovchansk, Russian troops captured another settlement, Tsegelne. What happens next, and what is the goal of this offensive? Of course, to straighten the entire frontline pocket. About 4 square kilometers remain to be cleared. Then comes the settlement of Kolodez. This is the nearest goal. The medium-term goal is, of course, Veliki Burluk. Russian forces will advance toward it after capturing Vovchansk. This is not far away either, and then Russian forces will meet in Veliki Burluk from 2 directions. When that happens, everything north of it, around 1,600 square kilometers, will simply fall away from Ukrainian control. But that is a long-term plan, likely for the entire year 2026 if the war continues. We move further. In the past 24 hours, advances also happened on the Kostiantynivka direction. Here, Russian troops advanced 600 meters and entered the northern part of Ivanopilia. Earlier, they entered the southern part. So now the village is caught in a vice, pressured from 2 sides. It is unlikely that the armed forces of Ukraine will hold out long under such conditions. Taking Ivanopilia is extremely important to bypass the Klebenbeik reservoir from the north, because the high ground above it hosts Ukrainian fortifications that prevent Russian forces from advancing. The only option is to attack from the rear, and that means taking Ivanopilia, and as you can see, progress continues. There is also progress in Pokrovsk. In the past 24 hours, Russian troops advanced inside the Dinas district, taking 4 more apartment buildings. The armed forces of Ukraine are clinging to this area, and it seems only a little remains. But every meter here costs bitter fighting. Additionally, north of the district, Russian troops cleared Kotyubinsky Street and reached the Dacha settlement of Druzhba, which is technically still part of Pokrovsk. Regarding Mirnohrad, I cannot yet confirm anything. There was information that the armed forces of Ukraine fully abandoned the southern part of the city, but there is still no objective video confirmation, even though 2 days have already passed. We are waiting. And of course, how could we forget the troops of the Vostok grouping? They also made progress in the past 24 hours. Russian soldiers took the village of Hai in the Dnipropetrovsk region. This is the 28th settlement in that region that has come under Russian control. Additionally, the territory south of this area was cleared, and Russian forces advanced slightly north into the fields between the villages of Novoalexandrivka and Alexiivka. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also announced that another settlement, Nechayivka, had been captured. This is already the 29th settlement in the Dnipropetrovsk region taken under Russian control. The area captured here exceeds 13 square kilometers. Now the troops will undoubtedly move toward the settlement of Otradne to fully secure the section of the highway, plus the crossroads and the junction. From there, most likely, the offensive on Pokrovsky will begin. At least this is how Ukrainian forces themselves assess the situation. Summing up the past 24 hours, the Russian army captured 5 settlements and 47.6 square kilometers. But apparently, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky and his advisors, the situation is stalemate and the armed forces of the Russian Federation are not advancing anywhere. Well, the facts speak otherwise. The armed forces of the Russian Federation captured Mala Tokmachka, Rovnopol and Yablukove in the Zaporizhzhia region. The occupation of these settlements creates a platform for developing an offensive in 2 directions at once, toward Huliaipol and toward Orikhiv. Both towns are heavily fortified strongholds, and now experts are debating which direction will bring the most significant Russian success. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Andrei Belousov, congratulated the 42nd Guards Motor Rifle Division on capturing Mala Tokmachka in the Zaporizhzhia region. You have made a serious step toward victory and toward achieving the objectives of the special military operation. There is no doubt that new successes will follow, the minister was quoted as saying on the official Telegram channel of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Belousov also noted that the 70th and the 270th Motor Rifle Regiments, breaking through enemy defenses, are steadily moving into more advantageous positions in the Orikhiv direction. Control over Mala Tokmachka was established the day before. Earlier, Rovnopol and Yablukove were also taken. Mala Tokmachka itself is located 10 to 15 kilometers east of Orikhiv, which is an important defensive hub of the armed forces of Ukraine. The distance from the settlement to Zaporizhzhia is about 60 kilometers. It is worth recalling that this is the same direction where in the summer of the year 2023, the armed forces of Ukraine attempted to break through toward Melitopol during their so-called counter-offensive. The operational value of Mala Tokmachka is determined by its location at the intersection of the N08 highway and a network of field roads. This allows the Dnipro grouping of the Russian armed forces to improve logistics on the southern flank and accelerate the redeployment of reserves. Capturing these positions also provides Russian units with better observation conditions and increases the effective range of artillery fire. According to experts, the capture of Mala Tokmachka creates the prerequisites for launching an offensive directly at Orikhiv. Such an advance will force the Ukrainian command to transfer forces from other parts of the front line. At the same time, it must be acknowledged that Orikhiv, like Huliaipol, is a powerful fortified area, and its assault will require significant effort. The capture of Mala Tokmachka opens fundamentally new opportunities for an offensive on Orikhiv, which is the key defensive node of the armed forces of Ukraine in this region. The distance between them is tiny, comparable to the distance between Donetsk and Makivka, said Vladimir Rogov. According to him, for 3 years, Mala Tokmachka remained a serious barrier that limited any chance of advancing on Orikhiv. Orikhiv itself represents the gateway on the road to Zaporizhzhia. This area in general hosts the largest fortified zone in the entire region due to historical reasons, he added. In Soviet times, part of the nuclear arsenal was located here. Naturally, the security around such an important facility was built accordingly. It is also important to note that Russian troops are simultaneously advancing in the Huliaipol sector. Around both towns, an encirclement is already beginning to form. The next steps will most likely include cutting the enemy's logistical lines and working against the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine using unmanned aerial vehicles. In principle, both towns will be taken in parallel, but Huliaipol will fall earlier because its encirclement is easier to complete, Rogov explained. Mala Tokmachka, the town over which battles were fought for several months, is a rather large settlement. It was the last major obstacle standing between Russian troops and Orikhiv. Once Orikhiv is liberated, the road to Zaporizhzhia opens, said military expert Yuri Knutov. The armed forces of the Russian Federation are using a well-tested tactic, bypassing the enemy's fortified strongholds from the flanks. In the case of Orikhiv, Russian troops will attempt to enter from the east and northeast through Huliaipol. According to him, the logical development would be to capture the gate to Zaporizhzhia after taking Huliaipole. This would allow Russian troops to enter Orikhiv from the rear, where Ukrainian defenses are much weaker compared to the southern approaches. Comparing the two towns, Orikhiv and Huliaipole, both are heavily fortified. In the case of Orikhiv, the enemy operated intensely during the counter-offensive of the year 2023. A large number of troops and equipment were concentrated there. As for Huliaipole, 2 defensive lines have been built, with concrete barriers, anti-tank ditches, and barbed wire, the expert detailed. In other words, the task facing Russian forces is quite challenging, he emphasized. However, it is important to remember that the weak point of the armed forces of Ukraine is their shortage of personnel. To plug holes near Pokrovsk, the Ukrainian command withdrew troops from the Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, and Sumy directions. As a result, the situation of the armed forces of Ukraine is only getting worse. The success of Russian forces will also be supported by the creation of a new branch of the armed forces, unmanned system troops, the analyst continued. This will allow concentrating a large number of drone operators on specific sections of the front line and breaking through Ukrainian defenses. This is exactly what happened near Pokrovsk. Russian troops, using a massive drone attack, practically destroyed every defensive line, hindering the advance of assault units. In conclusion, Knutov added that the armed forces of Ukraine will clearly have to retreat, and this withdrawal will be complicated by the change of season. The so-called green cover has almost disappeared. This makes the Ukrainian forces extremely visible to Russian drones. Well, that is all for today regarding the situation at the front line. Now let us look at what is happening on the political stage. The head of the office of President Volodymyr Zelensky appears on the recordings made by Mindich. According to a member of parliament, he organized the persecution of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office in the summer. Andriy Yermak appears in the investigation like Ali Baba, said Member of Parliament Yaroslav Zhelezniak. According to Prosecutor General Alexander Klimenko, after the scandal, Ali Baba began holding meetings with the Security Service of Ukraine on how to stop the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and punish its detectives. I think he knew perfectly well what was going on in the office of Mr. Zuckerman and in the apartment of Mindich, Zhelezniak noted. He believes Andriy Yermak must be dismissed as head of President Volodymyr Zelensky's office, but doubts that President Volodymyr Zelensky will do it. Information also appeared yesterday indicating that soon new recordings may be published featuring Andriy Yermak as well. It seems the administration of President Donald Trump has compromising material not only on President Volodymyr Zelensky's entourage, but also on President Volodymyr Zelensky himself. Against this backdrop, today President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that he is traveling to Istanbul for negotiations with President Donald Trump's advisor, Steve Witkoff. It seems the United States has prepared a final offer for him, and if he refuses, Washington will begin publicly revealing even larger corruption scandals involving him and his entourage. Thank you for watching, my friends. Stay safe, stay informed, and I will see you in the next update.